right. So we're getting on 8 o'clock in the morning here. So Corey and I have been up since I don't know, 3, 4 in the morning, and it's only the very beginning. So next up is we're going to have a conversation with one of my colleagues, Dave Piscai. I don't see is Dave. There you are, Dave. Let's put you on the stage. Can you hear us all right?
Yeah, I can hear you great. Can you hear me?
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
you sound great.
Amazing.
That headset is awesome, man. So this is going to be kind of a group chat, if you will, about API security testing and tooling, and probably a really good segue from Katie's talk, right? So I'm going to maybe set the stage a little bit here with some stats, and then love to have a conversation with you about like some of the tooling that you've been creating. Corey, of course, you know, just like Katie, this is what you do for a living. So love to get some feedback from you as well. But I think Brenton kind of did a nice job of teeing up like, hey, this stuff is happening for real out there, right? And so if you've attended any of my workshops or recent webinars, you might have seen some of these slides before, but this is just to reinforce like API breaches are happening, right? And I'm not trying to, point fingers, right? The point is like APIs represent some kind of new attack vector that is making its way through. These attacks are making it through all of our legacy defenses, right? And the names that you see here on this slide, these aren't little small businesses that don't have access to the best technology. These are some of the most sophisticated companies out there with the best technologies, expertise, and so forth, and still finding themselves vulnerable through API. So there's definitely something different about these APIs, which to me sort of suggests we need some different approaches, some different ways of tackling the problem. And it's not just the sheer volume of names on this slide, but look at the volumes of record. Like Brenton talked about Duolingo, 2.6 million records, Peloton, 4 million records. Trello was just a couple of months ago, 15 million, right? All the way up into the hundreds of millions of records, right? So these APIs are definitely producing exposures, right? Pretty significant exposures. And so one of the things we did recently was to analyze these and try to look for some kind of pattern, right? Like what are we seeing in these breaches, right? And the first thing that we noticed is number one, right there at the tip top, is rate limiting, right? So whenever we saw million records, 10 million, 100 million records, that suggests that some sort of brute force harvesting succeeded, right? It made it through those preventions, those detections, those defenses to prevent that kind of brute force attack. And I think, and this, by the way, maps to OWASP number 4 on the new API top 10. And one may conclude that, okay, the number one thing we got to go do is improve rate limiting, right? And I'm actually kind of curious, Corey, because I've done this talk track a number of times, and I want you to tell me if you think I'm full of crap or not. But I actually think that's the wrong conclusion out of this, right? Like tightening up rate limiting even more. Like at some point, it's so tight you're impacting legitimate business. We know business is spiky, so having a burst of activity is not unusual. And frankly, rate limiting is the last line of defense, and it's not the core problem, anyways, right? The core problem is your API is revealing something of value that makes me want to hit it 1 million times or 100 million times or so forth. So do you agree with that fundamental premise so far?
Yeah. So if an attacker is trying to break into your house and your door is unlocked, you don't even have a door, the windows are open, it really doesn't help incredibly much to just slow down the amount of attackers that are going in the front door. There are other problems that should be addressed, but that again, that layered approach of, yes, you want rate limiting, but you want your blocking and tackling done, and rate limiting is going to be a part of that blocking and tackling.
Yeah, absolutely, right. So if that's not the core issue, right? I mean, like imagine to use your analogy, right? The door's left unlocked, the windows are wide open, but inside is just an empty house, right? You're just not going to bother trying that 100 million times, right? It's like there's nothing here. There's no point, right? So if that's not the core issue, it turns out that the next three are, right? So, and they map to OAuth 1, 2, and 3, right? Broken authorization, broken authentication, data exposure. And it turns out on that prior slide, if I did my job well, these three things account for 90% of those breaches, right? And what we're talking about, broken authorization, is can user A access user B, or some sort of cross-account access that shouldn't be happening. Broken authentication, I'm kind of curious here. What this is defined as like weak or poor authentication, so, short password, no CAPTCHA, credential stuffing. I don't tend to see that a lot in the highly publicized breaches. What I see is no authentication, right? Like APIs left, like the door left wide open. Do you see that too?
Yeah, it's usually a combination. If one of these is a weakness, then there's a good chance that there are going to be other weaknesses involved. And even here, where we see leaked API keys, OWASP actually captures that up in authentication. And so that is much more competitive with authorization on this list. But yeah, when users are able to interact with each other's resources, that's just the tip of the iceberg of problems. There's probably all sorts of other vulnerabilities associated once you've discovered that.
And then last is probably the key is, right, if you have broken authorization, broken authentication, are you revealing something valuable, excess data exposure, right? And so like in that Duolingo example where email addresses were now mapped to your personal information, right? And so the reason why I'm teeing all this stuff up is it turns out like this is, like what do we do about this? Like if we know 90% of the breaches are these three things, and it doesn't mean the others aren't important, like what can we do to go and protect against it? And I think this is going to lead us into this conversation, right? So if you look at the life cycle of an API, right? And keep in mind, this is Dan's, like dumbing it down to a level I can understand. But, like we do a lot of security throughout the process, right? But for those types of flaws, right, this is what you do for a living, right, Corey? It's like you test to find these scenarios. And as organizations, we should be doing it, on our own. Like we should be hacking our own APIs effectively.
Yep. Yeah, those different layers of like having secure design, testing it before it's deployed into production, testing it, new deployments as they're going in, and then making sure that once it's out there that you're getting a third-party perspective that says, we've tested it here, more objective results. And the reason there's more objectivity there is you weren't the developer that had all that pressure put on them for that specific feature. You sort of get clouded vision when you get into now go back and test that for vulnerabilities. And so having that third-party perspective really helps on that testing side.
So Dave, this is where I want to pull you in here, right? And of course, if you have comments or color you want to add here, but the main thing that I wanted to tee up is like, okay, if we buy this premise that we should be testing our API, like Katie's been talking about, and what Corey is discussing as well, like how do we get people in this conference on that journey? And you have this idea of like, hey, how do we build some tooling, some technology to really simplify that? Because there's a lot of questions in Katie's session, like how do we do this? Is there a set of tools? Is there a way to go? So Dave, maybe help us out with what is this thing? Why did you want to build it? And then we'd love to see it in action.
Yeah, absolutely. So APIsec Scan is a product built by APIsec University. And so it follows the same premise of why the university was created. How do we get all of the learners, everybody who wants to get started in API security, how do we get them to raise the bar? How do we sort of help the community grow so that everybody's APIs are more secure? And this is one way that we saw after folks had learned how to hack APIs manually, they were looking for tooling. That's what we heard in a lot of response and feedback when we would reach out and talk to the students and say, how did you like the courses? They were like, the courses were wonderful. Now we want to know what to do about it. And so there's a ton of commercial products out there, but this one is not. It's free and it's completely self-contained. Right now, it's early in its life, meaning we're just getting started building it. We're just getting started developing it. So we do need your feedback. We'd love you to try it. It runs in GitHub Actions today because we figure that there's a huge population of folks in the community who use GitHub as their source control, and they may also use the actions to build and test their code as well. So as a stage in the action, you can actually test your APIs by simply providing a URL, because APIsec Scan calls and scans your live API. So it's not just static analysis, and an OAS file or some sort of documentation. So Open API specification is one way to go describe the endpoints in an API. So if you provide us a URL that we can call it with, and basically a list of endpoints that it contains and how to use them, then APIsec Scan will run in your GitHub. There's no SaaS component, although we do ask that you generate a token. It's not open source. We do have a lot of IP and we're continuing to build it out. So we ask you come provide, your email address, get a token, which will allow you to use APIsec Scan in your GitHub environment. So if I could figure out how to share,
Yeah,
I'll show it to you.
There's a present button down there at the bottom.
Yeah.
Try. I'll remove this from the screen while you're getting set up there.
Awesome. Share. And do you see my desktop?
Got it.
All right, great. Okay, so let me first show you some slides. So again, like I said, free scanner in GitHub Actions. What does it do? It writes tests and then it runs these tests on your infrastructure. So in GitHub Actions, they use these things called GitHub runners, and they're launched, in their cloud, and all of your data remains there. So there's nothing being sent out to APIsec University or anything like that. But we do require, the tool requires a live instance of the API to test against. What's interesting about it is folks are asking, and especially when we're seeing financial services or like PCI type requirements that start to say you should test your APIs on every single release during the software development lifecycle. So you can configure GitHub Actions to scan every time new code is pushed. And this will be a wider range than GitHub Actions soon. This is just the one we started with. And it's testing for things at the server level, open HTTP ports, looking at authentication, which are authenticated versus open endpoints. We're looking at your error messages or any kind of messages coming back from the API to see if we can discern what technology you're using in the application, which somebody could go and look up specific CVEs against the version of a library or some sort of technology you're using, web servers, and then it injects attacks against each of the endpoints. And so all of this gets written back to GitHub, and we have big plans for it. I'll show it to you, but first I want you to listen to our call to action, because if you're using GitHub, we super want your feedback. We're continuing to improve coverage by adding more types of security exploits to the validation list. We want it to work better. So that means easier and simpler to use, but still results in actual valuable findings. And we're continuing to add support. So I saw out of the corner of my eye some questions in the chat about, hey, can you use it in GitLab or Bitbucket or Jenkins? We ran a webinar and we asked all of the participants to vote. And we got back that Jenkins, GitLab, and Azure DevOps were the three next most interesting CI/CD tools that we could build support for. And so if you're able to try it out, please do. And I'll show you where to go to do that. But let's go see it in action.
Yeah, I was thinking.
Okay.
Item would be, we just have them like 5 minutes off.
Yeah.
So, oh, sorry, Dan, I can hear you.
Oh, no, sorry.
Apologies. So This is Crappy. I think many of you are familiar with Crappy. This is just a vulnerable API. OWASP built it, and it's a great target for practicing API security hacking, for testing tools against, if in case you have questions about how they work or what the results look like. And so this is our target that we'll use today. And the way that you use GitHub Actions, you can use their UI here, which they call them workflows that execute in stages. And the way that the workflows are set up is to run when new code hits the repo. And so we can simulate that now. So I have this action defined, and as you can see, it looks for pushes to the main branch, and it runs this particular job, which we call test scan. And it runs on a GitHub runner. It checks out the free APIsec University test action, and you provide information that allows it to run that I specified earlier. And so the base URL of the API, we're hosting it at crappy.apisec.ai, and then all of the endpoints will be appended to this base URL. Then the specification path, we have a file here in the directory that has the OAS. And so I specified the path of where the tool can find that. And then that APIsec U token. So let me go show you where you can generate this. I, of course, didn't include it in plain text, but if you go to APIsecUniversity.com, tools and resources and CI/CD, you can sign up. Once you hit register, it'll give you a token. And this is just because it's going to be a powerful tool that we're developing. It has a lot of our own information and IP that we've developed in it. And we want to make sure we know who's using it, because it has the potential to generate a lot of requests against APIs. So we definitely want to be cautious, and careful about who's getting this type of tool. So get your token, include it in your configuration, and then when I may not have committed. All right, let's make some sort of change. Maybe I can add something to the README, which I don't know. We can add something like that. Okay, cool. So git status. Great. We've modified the README. Whoa. Where did I go? Oh, that was my taskbar was in the way. Git add everything. Update README. Okay, great. So we can push this up to our repo, and that's the trigger for, hopefully there's other steps in here. Like normally what you'd do is you'd have a pipeline that would probably build and test the crappy code and deploy it to wherever you have the code hosted. And then as an additional stage, we can run this pen test. And so you can see it activated as a part of that new code push, and it's running. We can watch it run. There's that test scan stage where it's setting it up. And in a little bit, hopefully we will see that we've run tests against this API. Normally doesn't take this long, so maybe we're getting bit by a cold start issue or live demo.
Of course.
Drama.
Yeah, this is what happens, right? But now we know you're not, this isn't a recording. You're actually doing this for real.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. As we wait for this to go, I have a run that did execute successfully a little while ago. And so very, very similar. It's stuck on this one, which we see took 2 seconds. I wonder what's wrong with it. Not sure, but we can check back. A few seconds later, we run all of these checks against the API. And so when you looked at the list of what are we looking at, there's a lot of server misconfiguration checks. So at the end, at the base URL level, things like SSL, strict security, strict transport security headers, rate limit headers, some of the things that OWASP calls out, authentication checks. And so we're looking if authentication is enforced against these endpoints. Some of them say, error defined So it should be authenticated, but not enforced. And so we know that there are some of these issues baked into crappy. The things like CORS configuration and cookies and alternate HTTP ports. So is this being hosted or are there open ports that are not just the SSL port by which we're accessing this API? Different types of recon to learn about your API to enable us to run things like injections. And so for posts or any endpoint that takes parameters, we'll put injection strings like cross-site scripting or XSRF or MySQL injection, like those types of things to see if you reflect them back, which is typically quite interesting. Like if we send you a string that has malicious intent to it or allows you to execute a script and you place it into your database as one of the values of your parameters, this will find some situations where we do. And so if I scroll down all the way to the bottom of this list, what you'll see is there's exhaustive testing in a way in this API. And so we're going endpoint by endpoint to go and check the things like injections against rate limiting headers against them. And so past these, I don't know, 800 and some odd lines, there's been a lot of validation against this API. So with just a little bit of effort, like the theme of, I think, the last talk, you don't need to go super sophisticated to get coverage against API security. You can start small and you can go from there, because this definitely gives you information that you can pull on with threads to say, what is the actual impact of missing an authentication check? Like, is there something valuable in this mechanics report that might contain PII or something valuable for an attacker, email addresses, something like that. So again, I'm echoing that we are early on in the build of this tool, and we really would look forward to anyone who can try it out in GitHub. And I think, Dan was interested in teeing up maybe some interesting rewards for folks who would respond.
Absolutely. Good. Thank you for the reminder there, Dave. So yeah, hopefully what everyone saw here is like, this is a self-contained capability. In fact, when we first started talking, Corey, you were like, what if we made a version of this thing that can run at command line? I mean, is this kind of like the direction you were hoping we'd be going in?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, cover those baseline checks that we have to go through every time whenever we're pen testing.
And as Dave mentioned, this is version 1 or maybe even 0.9 or whatever you want to call it, right? So we very much want your feedback from the community. So we're looking for folks who will take this, run it, try it out, and give us feedback, right? And like, how can we make this better? Did it work? Was it intuitive? You do need to be a GitHub environment. Is that right, Dave?
Yeah, that's right. Today and the next ones teed up are GitLab, Jenkins, and Azure DevOps. And so what I've been asking folks is, you can email me. My email address is dave@APIsecUniversity.com. If you have a technology that you want added to that list, these were just the top 3 that we've been getting emails about. And so reach out, let me know if you try it and you love it. Let me know if you try it and you have feedback, because we want to hear good, bad feedback, because that's the only way that we get better at all of this. So yeah, please let us know how we can improve it.
Yeah, and just to finish that thought out, so please give us a try. You can just find it right on the APIsec University website. It's right up there in the top menu bar. But for everyone that is willing to sign up and say, yes, I'll do this, and spend some time giving your feedback to Dave, we'll thank you with a CASA voucher. End of story, right? So you got to be able to do it, install it, go through the process. If you get stuck right at the beginning, that's fine. We want to know about it. If you get stuck at the end, or you love it, or you have ideas to make it better, reach out to Dave. We will set this up for you, and we'll reward you and thank you with a CASA voucher if you're interested in that. Looks like there's some questions flowing in here, Dave. So we're going to throw these on here. Can you take a look at this one from Jake?
Yeah. So Dockerfile, running it directly. Yes, eventually. Not today. Today, it's pretty specific to GitHub Actions, and we're trying to figure out how to go and distribute it broader. And so what you'll find is, with some of these other tools, we'll continue to build it out to have the ability to run standalone, to have something like a CLI. I see Daniel was asking about that. So, today, and even integrations to output somewhere else, right? I see Mario asking, like, these are all really, really great suggestions. I'm going to go through and scrape the live chat, because these are all good ideas that we've heard a couple times, but as the echoes get louder, we'll build support for these types of things. So, yeah.
Yeah, and Mark, definitely, reach out to us. Let's start a conversation. Anyone that's really interested in this topic or wants to learn more, look, you sort of get the idea of what we're trying to do here at APIsec U, which is, we started with year one course, and it was kind of a crazy idea, but it really hit a nerve, and we started adding more courses. Then we were doing webinars. We got other people like Curity to contribute courses like the auth one we're launching today, APIsecCon. But the next step is like, how can we arm you with tooling and technologies to help you get started on this journey? So, Dave, wow, that went faster. We actually blew through the time real quick. There are other things I know we wanted to talk about, but thank you for giving us the tour. And to the community, please reach out. We'd sure love to get your feedback on this. And we know it's going to be rough around the edges. There's a lot more I know Dave has in mind for this technology. So let's set up some times and have a conversation about it. Now, we got to get ready here to split the APIsecCon into 2 tracks. All right, so this is the wrap up. Dave, thank you again